Welcome everyone to another episode of the Ol Timers Comicbook Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. And joining me this week, as always, it wouldn't be an old timer without the Professor. Professor, how's it going?
Going well, Johnny. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Even better now that the Bills beat the Patriots. Just saying.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. And of course, the third Crusader, whose Giants can't even spell the word playoffs, never mind being the damn things.
Don't worry, the judgment was rendered, and out goes Joe Judge. Good riddance.
Well, I heard on the grapevine that certain Brian Flores could be heading your way.
I heard that rumor too, and also Gettleman is out the door, so they got a lot of work to do. Yeah. And it's one of the struggles when a family runs a football team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they got a lot of work to do over there.
Well, you see, I mean, the Rooney's did all right by the Steelers.
Yeah, but that's them. This is the Giants we're talking about.
The Giants.
They have more than they were cut out for them. It's going to take a long time.
All right, okay. So, Old Timers, around this time, we're talking about tie-in books, licensees. It feels funny that we're talking about American football in the playoffs. Makes me wonder why we did not even consider this book to talk about.
That's a hard pass.
Why did no one come up with this? It's like, what?
That's a book needing a relaunch, I think.
You think?
He won't be able to beat anybody. He can't sack any quarterbacks. He can't touch over
yeah.
The joke kind of hit it died on the vine.
Yeah, sounds like he played for the Jets.
Ugh.
So you never know, it could blow the whistle on it and still get published.
Now, sometimes I want to talk about books that I actually like. This one was a stinker.
Did you even read it back in the day?
I did. I think I have the first issue of it upstairs in my attic, but it didn't last past the first issue for me.
Is that one of the ones that are going on the fire first, right?
Yeah. Well, there was a box of books that I told you when I moved out of my 10 years ago when I moved out from where I used to live. We cleared out my comic collection, and one of the boxes had a family of mice living in it, and I almost had a heart attack when I opened the box and saw all the shredded, chewed up books, and and then I thanked God that it was Rob Liefeld's Youngblood. And I was like, oh, thank God it wasn't anything good.
And yet, Super Pro still survived.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How'd the mice do? Would they have indigestion, or
they were no longer with us?
Yeah.
I see.
Still fine. They couldn't get past the ankles.
Yeah.
All right. All seriousness aside, we've got 3 books we're going to talk about. They are covering a whole wide range of different tie-ins. What do you think the attraction of a tie-in book is? Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the books we've chosen. 13th. What do you think the attraction is of a tie-in book?
Popularity.
Of what?
Whether it be a movie or toy line or a TV series, or something that's on the cusp of getting popular, right? Because comics are a form of media, so it's just an extension of that, and I think that's the attraction. So for those that may have been living under a rock and sort of heard of some of these shows or movies or toys or what have you, but we're certainly into the comic book world, well, this is a way they'd reach you.
Okay, so it does it have to be a popular thing, Professor? Are the tie-ins for? I mean, you and I both love Babylon 5. I remember DC having a Babylon 5 comic book for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do think that there has to be some kind of a demand for an audience or a demand for something like this, or a belief that they might have some kind of crossover capability from either the TV show to the comics, there's going to be some kind of a built-in audience, right? And
Right.
that's where I think with with toy lines specifically, especially with the one we're going to talk about, plus like Transformers, or Marvel was great with it, Sectors, or Mask, or some of these other toy lines, maybe even some of them that are even more obscure, were almost made because of the comic. The comic came out in conjunction with the toy line, and that even made it even more popular, because the kids that were buying these books, the Transformers, these toys were coming out in conjunction. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was huge for they had the toy line created, but then before the toys launched, Mattel went to, or Kenner, or whoever it was that made He-Man, went to the comic books and said, "Hey, we had a comic book ready." That's how they sold the toy line. And they had a comic book ready, but they didn't really have a comic book, so they had to go get it. So,
during the Bronze Age, there was an explosion of toys, comics. It went well together pretty much, and that lasted for quite some time. So it was like, I don't know. My analogy is, if you're a rock band and you want to get heard, you obviously do concerts and perform where you can, but you also want to sell, back then, your music on cassettes, on vinyl. Later on, it was CDs, just to try to get your music distributed. It's the same thing with properties. If you have a movie, you want to have a toy line, because toys will sell if you do them right, and with it comes a comic book, maybe a comic book record or what have you. So it's just trying to get the promotion and get the extend the popularity of that property.
That was the way none of us went. None of us picked the comic book line that had all the bands, like Kiss.
No, that's true. That's a good shout. It's funny. So when I look at the books that we've chosen today, for me, they are three distinct avenues, and part of that is when they were published. All right. So we'll get to that when we get to my choice. We're going to start off with the Professor's, and he is going where the truth is, out there apparently. And this is what we went with. X-Files #1 from Jim Shooter's Topps Comic. Or Topps Comics, there you go. Now I remember Topps Comics because they got into like the licensing, did the Dracula movie with Mike Mignola on there. That looked gorgeous. But this is written by Stefan Petrucca. It's got art by Charles Adlard, letters by John Workman, and colors by George Freeman. So everyone at the time loved the X-Files. This is around 1994. On Go Collect, you can get this for $75. On eBay in the UK, you can get it for a pricely sum of £3.98. There you go. Yeah. Cool. So, what is it about the X-Files, and what is it about this comic that you love so much?
So when we were talking, when we decided to do this theme, this is kind of what I thought about it. Other than the obvious, what we'd been thinking about, the other two that we're doing were obvious. I think.
This one I almost went Star Trek, but
So right, that too, right? Because I want to first shout out Mir and Kim, who did the covers for the series, and I think that he's awesome when it comes to the artwork. And Charles Adlard, who went on to bigger heights of fame in Walking Dead, and the artwork in here is really kind of great. And this is 10 years before he did Walking Dead, so this is all good stuff. The reason that I wanted to pick X-Files was because I thought X-Files, more than anything else that we've talked about, really kind of almost had its roots in the comics. I kind of think, because when you're looking and you're reading this book, does anybody think of Tales of Suspense? Anybody think of like the old science fiction comics from the 50s? Anybody think aliens from this, like from those comic books? That's where I kind of think they get all their side stories from, all the like the Monster of the Week stories. I was like, this show was made from like a journey into mystery comic book, and that's really, when I first started watching this, kind of what I thought was it really kind of had its roots in the 50s with the pulps and the science fiction magazines and all this other stuff that at this time Chris Carter, who created the X-Files, probably growing up reading, right? So so being able to translate or maybe retranslate from the TV show back into a comic book form, I thought was really interesting to kind of check out and see what they do. And X-Files was always great for most of their stories having some kind of ground in fact.
Yeah,
But
that was the trick. That was the trick, wasn't it? There's that much truth and this much exposition.
right. And that is one of the reasons I think the show is so well done, was because it kind of had you just a little bit like, really? Could it be? But then of course there are those episodes that went so off the books that you were just like, okay. But this series and this first issue in particular really kind of gets down into really kind of what the show and what they were really trying to do. And this was based on back in a religious Christian, those are the Fatima prophecy,
which are a real thing.
Which are a real thing.
Yeah.
I mean, which they spend the first couple of pages explaining to you the actual facts of the matter, and then spend the rest of the issue going to left field. And that was one of the things I really loved about this issue, is because you get to the basis, and I'm going to go out there and say, believe what you want on what the Christian religion or Catholic religion, and this just could be Catholicism could be another X-File, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So,
I think, to be fair, I'm not good. Let's not just paint one religion. I think all religions could be an X-Files.
Right. And that actually is, I think, in like page 5 when Scully is talking to Mulder and is like, are you saying that Muhammad or Buddha or whatever could be EBEs or extra biological entities or whatever, And I just thought the dialogue, it was kind of snappy. I like, when it's tough, right? When you're translating character actors onto the page, because it's an extra challenge for the artist to get them to look like the characters that they're portraying, and then it's tough for the dialogue for the writer to make it sound like it could be David Duchovny saying these lines. Or
did it sound like David Duchovny for you?
I think a little bit, yeah. I think it was reminiscent. But there were times, I think, like this, especially this issue, there's a scene where Scully, in that page, where Scully walks away and leaves a body on the table so that they can go in and touch. That's out of character for Scully, I think. And that's, for me, not a big, huge problem with the end of the issue, though it works, but that's one of the things I think towards the end of X-Files, and that ran for what, like 9 seasons on Fox. But the problem for X-Files, and this is why it got a little long in the tooth, is that you could never really resolve anything, right? You had to have Mulder, who is the believer, but he could never find the actual proof to prove anything of his theories. And then you had Scully, who was the forever skeptic. So she had to take the other side. And you really needed that in this show and in this comic to kind of have that back and forth. So you had Scully who would see, but be able to explain away scientifically what it was she was seeing. But then Mulder, who just blindly believed and had these wacky theories, which made it work. When the show stopped working, when Scully started to believe.
Now, inversely, they did not make Duchovny. They didn't make Mulder not believe, because he kept believing on top of that. So there was no conflict. You raised an interesting point. I think some of the art, very much like the script, is reminiscent of the characters. I'm going to do my best Mulder voice now. And 13, what did you think of this book? Is there truth out there for you?
I thought everything in this book was fact.
There you go.
Well, no. I used to watch the X-Files religiously. I believe it used to come on every Sunday night at on Fox. I remember that.
Yep.
So I did stay tuned for quite a number of seasons until the Smoking Man episode, if I remember that, when they were trying to think, when they were saying it was his dad or whatever. But as far as the comic book is concerned, this particular issue, this was like the Da Vinci Code before the Da Vinci Code,
Yep.
in a way.
Good shout. Yeah.
So, yeah, again, I agree with Bud's point. Like, to get Mulder and Scully to emulate the on-screen personalities of David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, it's a tough assignment because one of the things, and I say this all the time, the cover is phenomenal. You see this on a newsstand and you're a fan of the show, this should get your attention. And the first thing you're going to notice is the logo's there, the faces are there, and it's like, wow, I got to buy the book because, yeah, we're not just watching the show, but also reading it. So there's that. There has to be
Yep.
some sort of appeal for this book to get picked up. The interior artwork, I'm not too keen on, but it does the job. I guess it fits. But certainly the plot and the theme are there. So again, like you guys said, they'll give you a bunch of facts, and then from there the story will spiral in any potential direction. So as a reader, you're not supposed to expect anything to happen, and that's what caught me off guard, to be honest. So I'm reading this whole thing and I'm like, what's fiction, what's fact? I'll tell you one thing that's fiction in here is the traffic scene of the Van Wyck Expressway in New York City going to LaGuardia Airport. There's never that little amount of traffic. I can attest to that. So that I'm like, yeah, there's no way that that's true. So if that's
Just-
any X-Files, that is definitely not
You
a.
can just imagine the guy, right? I'd like ring up his editor. Do I have to draw that many cars? Really?
It should be a hell of a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So, that made me laugh, but I'm not going to spoil it for the readers. I thought this was a very good, well-written story, well plotted. And I felt towards the end, with the exception of the scene that Bud mentioned, Mulder and Scully were true to their personality. For a first issue, that's pretty impressive,
Yes.
because this is it. This is hit or miss. Because if you're a diehard of X-Files and you're not sold on this one issue, you're done. Especially if you're not into comics like that. If you're just picking this up because you're into X-Files and you blow this, they're gone.
Cool. So I mean, this is you're absolutely right. This is the aspect you were talking about with the need for a tie-in book. X-Files at the time was huge. It was a multinational with massive success. Me and my friends, we used to have X-Files nights where we'd all go around we'd nominate someone whose house we were going to crash for that night, and boom, we'd go and watch X-Files. I remember one time watching the Eugene Toombs episode, the very first one, and
it's one of the best ones.
Yeah, and we had at the time we had air vent heating in the house. It wasn't switched on, and Jerry, my dog at the time, halfway through the episode, just got up, looked at the vent, and started barking. I was like, really? Come on. That's the last time I watched X-Files at my house for a while. Anyway, this book comes out when X-Files is huge. So this is probably the most safest way to launch a tie-in, would you say? The fact you've got that, we talked about the built-in audience straight away.
Right.
So, the fact that everyone knows who Mulder and Scully is. There's an illusion on the first page that they're back from somewhere. So it sounds like, is this probably structured after season 1 when they get fired and then come back? Maybe you'd have to check to make sure where it is. But there's a lot of reading in this book, and I think from a comic book fan, even back then, I mean, this is the 90s, I think maybe people weren't used to this much reading in a comic book.
Here's the other thing I want to throw in there. Topps itself, over here in the States, very popular, obviously, with baseball cards and other sports paraphernalia and what have you. Everybody knew that logo through that. But when it came to comics, you're like, okay. And then you see the line that they're putting out there. It's almost like the modern day version of the IDW, where they're also doing all these other licensed comic books. So it's for those that weren't into comics and maybe knew about Topps, but knew about the show. I wonder how many mainstream collectors actually gravitated to this.
It's a good shout. I know my brother was a huge X-Files fan, and he bought this religiously. reading this, how much better do you think this could have been if they'd gone with like a Vertigo feel and made it really like over the top rather than kind of, and that's the problem. That's the other problem with tie-in books, isn't it? Especially if it's an ongoing series like X-Files. There are only certain things you can do and certain things you can't do. Because if you're going to have to get rid of one of the characters, you've got to bring them back at some point for it to tie into the show.
Right.
You know, that was the problem with the Star Trek comic book for a while, because the comic book started Spock in it, but he'd been bumped at the end of the Wrath of Khan, and he wasn't. You know, the Enterprise had blown up, so they're on a different ship for 6 months. And then get there. It's just it gets a bit messy, but no, I think from a production point of view, I think Topps Comics were one of those indie books that started coming out, indie companies that started coming out and had really good production values.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mentioned the Dracula. It's the Bram Stoker Dracula movie that tied in. Mike Mignola art with the little baseball cards and stuff. Really good fun. So,
cards were the thing in the 90s.
Yeah, massive. I once sold a Tuvok Dinosaur Hunter card for £15. It was free in a previews that I picked up somewhere. There you go. Who'd have thought it, eh?
Cool. Who would have thought?
Who'd have thought it? Yep. So X-Files, I think I agree with. I think I agree with Professor. It did hit a wall somewhere. I think I dropped out about season 6.
Well, Mulder left the show and they recast.
Right.
And then at that point, I was like, no, because Mulder was the whole show. You know, you needed to have that passionate, driven person, and when you replace him, it's a jumping off point for fans. So,
well, the whole basis of the conspiracy was based on the fact that his sister was abducted by aliens.
Right.
And in fact, the show actually didn't they do a movie special on that?
They did.
Kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit at that point. So it was almost like a writer's block. Like, where do you go from here?
Well, and what I said before, when Mulder left the show, that was when Scully became the believer. Right. So she was no longer the skeptic, and then they had to bring in other characters to be skeptics. And
then Mulder reappeared again for half a season. And they had a kid. Was it their son? Was it her son? Was it? Oh, you know.
Yep.
And when the show came out, it was the height of the 90s conspiracy theories and paranoia about everything.
Yep.
So
that was the adult film version of the title of this book.
Yeah. Well, you know, if you can turn on the X-Files, you can turn on the X-Files now, and a lot of those episodes still hold up. And the only thing that doesn't hold up is the cell phone stuff. You know, like I think the first season he has the big blocky cell phone. You know, so that kind of really throws a wrench into the you know.
Well, I remember
you're watching something dated. So
she would have the cell phone on when she's supposed to be spying on somebody. That was the other thing too.
The one that always got me, and I saw this in a magazine. I think it's not my observation, but it's when they decide to switch who's driving. So like they're driving somewhere, they get out of the car, and then Scully will take over from Mulder, but she never changes the seat. And like she's like this big, and he's like up here somewhere. It's like, dude, come on, check your mirrors.
That's funny. That is funny.
Oh my dear God! All right, okay. So next up, we're going with I want to say it's a bit of a niche book. I'm not sure because I mean this I think appeals to a large, broad comic book place. I know loads of people have this as like a bit of a soft spot for this book. I'm a Brit, so I have no idea what the hell's going on. All right, so we're talking about the real American hero. Ta-da! There you go, G.I. Joe #1. This is from G.I. Joe, Real American Hero #1. This is from May 1982. Right, are you ready for this? Go collect. Have this as a 9.6, and it's $600. Right.
That's interesting.
Now eBay has the most dog-eared copy kicking around. £400. unbelievable.
Hmm.
This I don't get what the popularity of this book is, but we'll go through the stats. It's written by Larry Hama, who's comic book royalty practically. Herb Tripp, uh, or Trimpy, I should say. Inks by Bob McLeod. Colors by Glynis Wen. All names we've said a million times on different books. All
Yep.
right. So this is the 13th choice. So 13th, take it away.
Allow me to educate you and those in the audience that are not familiar with what a real American hero is in G.I. Joe.
I hope it's
So,
Scarlet because she looks foxy.
yeah, well, that's part of it.
Woohoo!
G.I. Joe goes back to around World War II, where they started off as a toy line based on how soldiers are coming back from the war and the popularity of the soldiers and the adoration that they receive from their families.
All
So
right.
marketers got a hold of that, and toy makers rather, and they developed the first GI Joe toys and whatnot, the 12-inch dolls, or they hate when you call them dolls, but the that's what GI Joe was. It was very basic, just a military man. And later on in time, the Vietnam War came about, and back then it was all about peace, love, and happiness. So the
Mm-hmm.
popularity of the soldier wasn't as great as it was coming out of the war. So patriotism levels were not as high as they were coming out of World War II. So G.I. Joe took a little bit of a hit. But as time will tell, and it'll tie into this book, later on in the 70s, 80s, they wanted to resurrect G.I. Joe, the toy line. And that they did. But with it this time around, they put a lot more thought into it. They didn't want it to be a 12-inch doll. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, they came out with the first action figure, something that was very posable, maneuverable. And then they saw what Star Wars was doing, the Kenner line,
Mm-hmm.
and shrunk the toys down and made them more posable and what have you. So similar to some comments I made on the Transformers #1 comic book several episodes ago, they looked for help. Hasbro had the rights to GI Joe,
Mm-hmm.
so they looked towards Marvel, and Marvel helped them develop a story. And with it, they wanted to do a comic book, and this is what you got. So GI Joe in itself as a title in comics, there's actually two comics called GI Joe, which is in DC Showcase 53 and 54.
Mm-hmm.
But those are basically reprints of old DC books like GI Combat, Our World at War, which were those are very popular books back then. But now you have GI Joe called a GI Joe Real American Hero with Marvel. At this time, they basically wanted to, just like with Transformers, we need to flesh this story out. And one of the questions that Larry Hama said when this was brought to his attention is like, so who are they fighting? So
Yeah.
Hasbro they didn't even have a villain. GI Joe was just going out there on random missions and whatnot.
We're going to war with who?
We're
Who's
going to
on?
war, yeah. Well, who are we fighting? So this is what Marvel excelled at, and at this period in time, right, for Marvel, they had
Mm-hmm.
so many guys, like you said, Johnny, that are known as legends today.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this thing in the Marvel offices of whoever got toy book assignments were losers.
Yeah.
But someone jumped at the bit for this, and that was Larry Hama. Larry Hama himself being a Vietnam vet and a former actor. So he gave it a whirl, and the rest is history. So G.I. Joe started off. As far as the value is concerned of this book today, does not surprise me one bit. I do own a near mint copy of this, which I have like double mylar to protect it as best as I can. I won't get it graded, but I remember this book when it came out, and I
Mm-hmm.
certainly remember the cartoon. So slowly but surely, the comic was out. They were fleshing out characters. Some of them became very, very popular and legendary, as in like Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes, when he was developed as a toy, was just painted black, like the Rolling Stones song,
Yeah.
and whatever. It was just cheaper. Yeah, whatever. What are we gonna do with this character? How are we gonna design him? The design was we won't.
Yeah.
And sure enough, that became the most popular GI Joe, as we all know
Definitely.
today. So you get to meet in the comic books, you get to meet the GI Joe members firsthand. A lot of these characters, when the cartoon came out later on, you would see some of them in the book, and some of
Mm-hmm.
them you could only find them in the book, and then vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. But some of the main core characters like Snake Eyes, Scarlet, the Baroness, Cobra
Mm-hmm.
Commander, they all appeared in comic book form in this very book, and that's what really drives the value of this book. In all honesty, because you get a lot of the characters here. The story in itself, Larry Hama's first time writing with GI Joe, very wordy, and you get he's just trying to paint this picture for Cobra, because the early concept was we want to make Cobra a a worldwide terrorist organization,
Mm-hmm.
and GI Joe was supposed to be a highly trained special mission force, and that went after groups like this.
Mm-hmm.
So here you see Cobra firsthand, not wasting any time with the kidnapping of a major scientist there, a doctor,
Yep.
and GI Joe is sent in to for these. It was almost like a Mission Impossible, except with a team.
Yeah.
So, uh-huh.
I was just going to say, I think you massively undersold it, because when you start reading this book, it reads like just like like an advert to show how to play with the toys. But then the doctor character herself, she's got issues. The Joes
Mhm.
don't like her. The Joes think she's a traitor for what she's done. And even at the end of the book, after they do whatever they need to do, she's still unapologetic over her political views.
So one of the things that Larry Hama set out to do was, being a war veteran himself, acting on MASH as an actor there, and then doing this. He's trying to bring a sense of realism into this book. It's supposed to be more of a thinking man's GI Joe story than you would get at the cartoon. And one of the things that he had a gripe with the cartoon version of, in the cartoons you can't kill.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right, every Cobra soldier shoots a laser beam and they always miss, just like the infamous
Stormtroopers.
Star Troopers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have that going on in the books, which he liked. You can get a little bit more realistic with it, and the weapons, even the weapons that were portrayed there. Larry Hama was known to do research on the military technology, the weapons, get familiar with the names, the shapes, so he can convey it to the rest of the team. He wanted to bring that sense of realism in there, and same for the vehicles, the whole nine yards. So that's the main difference between the book and the cartoon, and later on the movies, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously went a whole different direction. But GI Joe, if you think about it from the very beginning, started off as a toy.
Mm-hmm.
Then they just went through a kind of a relaunch,
Mm-hmm.
modified the toy, and at that point they were enjoying the explosion of toys, toy commercials, accessories, cartoons, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
This was like a major marketing thing, and Hasbro did the right thing with going to Marvel, because those guys, they know how to make toys. They didn't know how to make a story.
Mm-hmm.
So just like we spoke about in a review with He-Man, same with Transformers, they approached Marvel, and again, Marvel put this on a map in the comic book format. Eventually, the cartoon comes out, and it definitely helped get some more exposure for GI Joe, because the comic wasn't a hit at first,
Mm-hmm.
but eventually people were going to the comic books, and they couldn't get enough of it. The toys even more so.
Mm-hmm.
I think the estimate was 2 out of 3 boys in America had some sort of a GI Joe in their collection, including me,
Mm-hmm. I
which
thought
they're
you
all
would have
dead.
had. I thought you would have had 13 of them, but no, never mind.
They all died in a war in the backyard of one of my friend's backyard. A war to end all wars. He attached firecrackers to them, and they all died, so they had a happy ending. Now today we're idiots looking at how much they're worth.
Next door
Yep.
neighbor was Spike from Toy Story. Or
Yeah,
whatever it's called.
but my some final words on the comic. So the issue number one, again, like I said, is I see it at conventions. The value is going up more and more and more, because there's so many characters that come out in this debut book in comic book format. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, Cobra Commander, Baroness, Snake Eyes,
Scarlet.
Scarlet. So the comic eventually, for those hardcore GI Joe guys, this run lasted it's still going on today in one, through IDW, but
Yeah, it's still Larry Hama as well.
right, it's one of the most successful, if not the most successful toy line slash comic spin-off series ever. Transformers hasn't lasted this long. GI Joe's has that long stint where even though it jumped from Marvel, went to other publishers and what have you, GI Joe in comic book format has been out there for quite some time for it being based off a toy.
Okay, cool, excellent, Professor. G.I. Joe, was he the greatest of them all? Greatest hero of them all?
When I was a kid, I had all of these figures, every single one of them. I had the first wave with it that didn't have the elbows that moved or the kung fu grip. So I kick myself for getting rid of those two because they were all first editions, and I probably would have got a lot of money for them even if they were open. But the thing I loved about the comics was you almost had to have a military dictionary next to you to like figure out the acronyms and everything in the book, the types of the weapons, everything is like accurate when you're talking about the actual military the tactics they were using, the guns, of course, when you get away from the laser beams or the jetpacks, that was a little bit of science fiction. But for the most part, what was supposed to be accurate was, and that's what I thought was cool. And then we're talking about the toys and the almost like a symbiotic relationship that Hasbro had with Marvel when they were coming out with the book and the toy line, because even the toys that you were getting, those and I'm sure if anybody had the toys, everybody would cut out the classified dossiers on the back to collect them, right? Those were all written by Larry Hama,
Right.
Right. And that was really interesting to know that all these characters that were coming out. And when I got the next wave of GI Joe figures that would come out, I would just wait for the next issue of GI Joe to see if they introduced them in the comic book. And that was the one thing that actually kind of after a few years started to annoy me about GI Joe, because there were so many characters that were coming out, you couldn't keep track of them all. And then then 13, what you were saying before about being able to have more kind of adult themes in the GI Joe comic book, I think there was several issues where Larry Hama just like culled a lot of the Joes, killed them off.
Yeah,
Killed him off like in like 5 or 6 issues, and there was the big war with Cobra, and he killed off a ton of Joes, and that was when it actually started getting even more exciting, because you were like, who are they gonna kill off? Because you didn't know. And
which figure am I throwing in the bin this week?
Right. And
that was the beauty of it, because it was fairly self-contained. I say that because they did have crossovers in the Marvel days with Transformers and whatnot, but this was pretty much its own universe, and this was Larry's playground.
So, and I never read any of the IDW Joes or anything. Did that series continue directly from Marvel? So is the Marvel stuff canon in
the numbering was kept, but I believe some of the continuity was not.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you. I tried. I've got to be honest. I avoid GI Joe because I know nothing about it at all. I mean, we were saying off air, we had in the UK, we had Battle Action Force instead of GI Joes. It's the same figures. I look at Snake Eyes as the same character that I've seen in Action Force, and and I've seen the Baroness and Cobra Commander, and it's like the same bad guys. But it's like, I was Star Wars. I was Star Wars when I was a kid. Star Wars and Star Trek. None of this G.I. Joe Action Force stuff.
Ironically, G.I. Joe, like I said, the toy was created in a way to somebody had to try to topple Kenner with the Star Wars toys, and G.I. Joe did that. That's how G.I. Joe started taking off. And then the number of characters, I think like Star Wars had about 92-ish, almost 100 different characters, but G.I. Joe smoked that, blew that out of the water. To Bud's point, where they went well over the 200 and somethings with different characters.
Yep. They were coming out with characters like that were dressed up in like Hawaiian shirts and stuff, and then
they were working on overdrive, because that's not easy. Like to your point with Larry Hama having to create character profiles, and he's like, well, you know what? I'll just we'll use that on the back of the toy.
Yeah,
So
and then
I thought that was a pretty cool idea.
Adding like they added like Sergeant Slaughter and
Right.
other characters to the
The
Joes.
fridge.
Yep, the refrigerator Perry. And if you ever got, they had a GI Joe handbook, like they had a Marvel handbook.
Right.
And if you got that, then you would have realized that they actually were in talks to have Rocky,
Yep.
Sylvester Stallone's Rocky as a GI
Oh
Joe,
my God.
to the point that he was actually in the book as Rocky Balboa as a Joe. And I don't know why it never went through. It was something with the Hollywood, but it was funny. It was funny.
Oh my
I want to
God.
throw something in here too. Like, let's not overlook Herb Trimpe's work on this either.
Yes.
Same with Bob McLeod. So, for those who are not familiar, who is Herb Trimpe, guys?
Incredible Hulk, baby.
Yep. He had that long stint on the Incredible Hulk, and here he is drawing on this book. And for kids at this time collecting this book would probably have no idea who the hell that is.
No.
Read your comic history, folks.
Yeah, read your comic history. So this is the second part of the whole tie-in phenomenon. So you've got X-Files book that came out when X-Files was huge.
Yep.
Yeah. Now you've got this book that's coming out to help promote the toy line.
Yep.
And hopefully the two cross over. And as 13th so eloquently put, it absolutely, totally has.
It blew Star Wars out of the water. I just wanted to say that to see Johnny's reaction.
Well,
I find your lack of faith disturbing. Just saying.
And as a kid that had two brothers and that we all collected toys together and collected comics together, having G.I. Joe come out was great because now you had someone for your Star Wars figures to fight too. So I was like, I was getting all of them. I didn't care.
That was the joke before Cobra was created. Who are they going to fight? Stormtroopers?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Before we get to the last book, we're going to take a quick break. We're going, because we're doing tie-ins. Here is the Jank Think Tank. You think, what's that going? What's he talking about? There is a Magic the Gathering comic book out as well, so go check that out. It's written by Jed McKay, who's killing it on Black Cat. If you go and watch MPP, you'll know what I mean. And also, he's doing the Death of Doctor Strange. So there you go. Recent stuff from an old timer. Who'd have thunk it? Anyway, here's your advert. Enjoy. There you go. The Jank Think Tank for everything that is Magic the Gathering related. Go and enjoy that for all you card players. Next up, for our final book, you can't talk tie-in without talking about the greatest space fantasy film of all time. That's right, Star Wars. Let me go through the credits for this first issue. Written, edited by Roy Thomas, art by Howard Chicane. That's how I'm pronouncing it. It's how I've always pronounced it. Letters Jim Novak, colors by Mary Severin. July 1977. Go collect. Have this on at $1,100. eBay in the UK, you can pick it up for £319 as a single issue, or the lower grades, you can get issues 1, 2, and 3 for £275. So it's Star Wars. I mean, does it need any explanation other than it's Star Wars? Let me try and put some thought into this then. So it's a movie adaptation that came out. There were 3 issues in before the movie hit. Mm-hmm. So you have no idea what's going on there. And it kind of shows the early art is a little bit scratchy, a little bit like, oh my god, it doesn't look like it's supposed to look like. I personally like the Chicane artwork, but hey ho. it then sort of evolves into a more cleaner representation of what we'd expect from the movie. There are scenes in the comic that don't happen in the movie. They're because it's based on novelization rather than the actual movie scene.
Like deleted scenes.
Yeah, lots of deleted scenes. So after issue 6, the adaptation stops, and then we get to follow Luke and we get to follow Han and Chewie and do their own separate things before coming back together again. So it's kind of like an ongoing saga, I guess. The trick, of course, with this is they can't keep bumping into Darth Vader all the time because they're in the middle of a movie thing. But before we sort of like turn our nose up at some of the daft things and the contrivances they had to go through, I just want to give you a rundown of some of the creators that worked on Star Wars. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Archie Goodwin, Don Glutt, Chris Claremont, Carmine Infantino, Walt Simonson, Herb Trimpe, Alan Kuberberg, Tom Palmer, Tony DeZunga, Dave Cockrum, Tom Orzechowski, can never say that, Joe Rosen, David Michelini, Ron Friends, Gene Day, Steve Layola, Terry Austin. That's just to say some of the people that worked on Star Wars. You know, you run that list down on any comic book creator list, there are some genuine Marvel superstars have worked on Star Wars books.
Yep.
The original series lasted for something like 107, 108 issues before dying a death. Return of the Jedi pretty much killed it after that, I'm afraid, because there was no bad guy to fight. We couldn't go and fight the Jaws.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the license went to Dark Horse, and now IDW do a bit, and of course, Marvel got it back again. So for me, this series is absolutely great. The best part of the series, and I've said this before, is between Empire and Jedi when they're trying to find a new base, they're looking for Han, they go up against the space station called the Tarkin. And you're thinking, what, to go against the space station? Yeah, I mean, got to bear in mind, the space station Return of the Jedi, the space station in Force Awakens, that's all they build in bloody Star Wars world.
Yep.
So for me, and this is the second part of the tie-in element, you've got to think 77, right? So all you didn't have VHS recorders, you didn't have on-demand TV, you didn't have mobile phones that you could stream stuff from. All you had was going to the pictures, the cinema, to watch the movie, and then tie-in books. And I think when you look back at things like X-Files, which you could get every week in your TV, in your living room, Jaws, which you could play with your figures and watch the cartoons, I think the Star Wars comic book was massively important for maintaining Star Wars in the mind eye of the populace, of the people. Because without the comic book, who's to say that everyone would forget about Star Wars was because it was going to be another 3 years before Empire came out. There you go. That's my thoughts on Star Wars. Professor, were you a fan? Were you a fan of the Jedi's and Sith?
Absolutely, and it was one of the books that really I think the comics enhanced my love for the movies and my love for the collecting of Star Wars figures. And remember, between 77 and 80, we had 3 years of a drought where the only new stuff you were getting was from the comics. So
exactly.
it filled a niche for kids that were starved for more content. And of course in Star Wars, you only had the 3 movies. You didn't have TV shows or anything like we do today, where they market the crap out of everything.
Yep.
But with this, I commend a lot of the creators that worked, especially on these early issues, where all they had was that one movie to go by, and you can tell, especially, you can't tell in this issue, but Carmen Infantino, when he gets on this book, he doesn't know what Chewbacca looks like. He doesn't know what anybody looks like. Han Solo's face is so fat. Luke Skywalker doesn't look like Luke. Nobody looks like who they're supposed to. And
I mean, Luke's blonde. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And Leia's the chick with the buns on her head. So that's all you need to know, isn't it?
And I will die on the hill that the hardest character to draw in comics is Darth Vader. And so to get his angles right, if you do something wrong, he just doesn't look like Darth Vader. You know, and precious few characters that were introduced in this first, they call it the Legacy series now. Just a few of the characters made it to the like in comics today. Valance, so they just showed Valance in the book. He's one of the few characters that they introduced in the first run that they actually kept.
As long as they don't use Jackson anymore. Whew,
oh boy. Yeah. So some of the books, some of these issues really kind of terrible, if you want to go that way, because of they had to kind of exist in the comic book universe, and they didn't really know what Star Wars was going to become, right? Yeah. Especially between A New Hope and Empire. So they were doing some weird stuff. you know? They were. But once you get post Empire, there's more of they kind of know the roadmap there. So you see a lot more kind of traditional Star Wars type stories, like finding the Rebel base and introducing the Hujibs. And I love the Hujibs. I love the Hujibs. Like look, there's a Carmen Infantino Chewbacca if you go back a page. Oh my God, what the heck is that? That looks like he looks like Sweetums from the Muppets. Anyway, the Star Wars comic book was groundbreaking in its time. I don't think that I think prior to Star Wars, the only licensed product that Marvel did was Conan, right? Or something. Well, and Rom, right? Rom was coming out at this point too. But without this huge success in licensing for Star Wars, does Marvel do G.I. Joe? Do they do Transformers? Do they do the Micronauts? Do they do anything else on the licensing side? So this was a feather in the cap to Roy Thomas, who at the time was the one that ended up having that went to Stan and said, we have to do this. And I think at the time that this made millions of dollars for Marvel, and so did the other toy properties going forward. I don't think we even get G.I. Joe if there's no Star Wars.
That's a shout. What I would say about some of the Star Wars stuff is we're looking at these short pages here. Some of the Star Wars material, very much like Transformers, later on, there is, for the UK market, there's the adaptations from the US books, but we also had Star Wars Weekly, and that I'm showing you now is exclusive to Star Wars Weekly. So you want to go and check out different types of things, then different types of artists. I mean, you've got Dave Cockrum coming up now. We've just had some Walt Simonson. I know 13th you said that Simonson's your guy when it comes to Star Wars.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Sorry, is that what you said? Sorry.
Yeah.
Cool. Right, there you go. Excellent. 13th. Star Wars, yeah, nah.
When this came out, I was an infant. So the comic books, I wasn't even old enough to read yet. So
really? I thought,
yep.
Really? Oh man, Jesus.
So I do own this book. I did go back and get it. Mine's like a mid-grade, so it was great the day I got this book. And again, it debuts a lot of Star Wars characters in comic book format. The one thing that bothered me on the cover is Darth Vader. It looks like he stepped in front of a gamma bomb. With the coloring's a little off, but just whatever. Just get the Sith out of here, I guess. The art in here by Howard Chaykin, it's like you guys said, it's rough. I did not like the art at all. Roy Thomas, I'm here for Roy Thomas's writing, whether it's lengthy or not. It's great. What bothered me, the spelling for C-3PO and R2-D2, it threw me off, but it's all good.
Is it spelled wrong?
Well, aren't they R2, A-R-T-O-O? Most people will do the R2, right? The alpha and the.
I've seen it spelled out, and I'm used to it being spelled out in the comic strips
and
the newspapers.
And the novelizations.
Yeah, what I learned from it too, from George Lucas, was a fan of Fantastic Four comics and based Darth Vader off Doctor Doom. So that was cool to learn that he actually had an interest in comics, and I wonder how much that played into this happening. And to Bud's point, Marvel didn't perfect adapting just yet, but
Mhm.
Marvel was the comic book company to go to. And you got to remember too, like in the late 70s, what was Marvel going through? Like some of their titles were not doing too well. And
Yep.
the Star Wars phenomenon, everyone was gravitating to Star Wars, the movie. And
Yeah.
so by the time I was old enough to realize what the hell was happening, Star Wars, the first episode, or really the third, was already getting rerun on TV. And I remember getting my hands on Star Wars comics, probably like, early on in the run or whatever. But
Mm,
so I'm just trying to get familiar. But the toys were everywhere. The lunchbox was everywhere with the thermos. Everything was
mm,
Vader. Kids dressing up in and Halloween costumes as Vader,
Yep.
and things like that. So it was definitely out there. You can get the bed sheets or whatever of Star Wars. The toys were certainly Kenner made the toys. They were everywhere. So
mhm.
there was nowhere where you could turn and you didn't see a Star Wars thing. The one other thing I want to throw in here too, that at this point in time, they're also competing with video games, right? So video games were coming out, kids were gravitating to that, right? So you had like
Right.
Pac-Man, Atari, and all this stuff. So this was like an explosion again of media content for people to
Mm,
go to. If you had the money, you go buy an Atari, you probably wouldn't even know what the hell's happening in a comic. But if you were not as fortunate to get something like that, and you love, a certain line and you see it in comic book format, you'd probably be excited. And I was as a kid because I wanted to learn more
mm.
about Star Wars. And then by the time I watched the rest of the movies, my dad took me to see Return of the Jedi when it first came out, and I got the big, it was almost like a magazine size Return of the Jedi adaptation.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, this is what happened in the movie. So similar to like when I'm reading this now after watching Star Wars more than 13 times, I can assure you, and reading this issue, I'm like, yeah, this is literally an adaptation. It lived up to its adaptation. But again, my only knock on issue one is just the artwork was a little rough for me. But it's the nuts and bolts of the Star Wars universe is there for people that may not know or not as invested or just trying something and then maybe they get hooked on later on. I agree with you guys with the artwork later in the run gets much stronger. It
Mhm.
really looks even more of an adaptation. The characters start taking the actor appearances and whatnot, so that makes it strong. But again, when I saw Star Wars #1 available with my local guy, I picked it up because why not? Why wouldn't you
Mm.
want to have Star Wars in your #1 in your collection? You know what I mean?
Well, I don't. I don't have Star Wars #1, but I do have these nifty little paperbacks.
Mm,
I don't know if you can see those. So I have these for Star Wars Empire and Jedi, and it's basically the comic book adaptation, but in
mm.
black and white form.
Those are hard to
So
find. I have an Avengers and Fantastic Four adaptation like that.
so I have these. These are prized possessions in my bookcase downstairs. Um, for me, it's. I saw the film. I saw the film when it came out. I thought it was all right. I was a kid at the time, so I'm like, what's going on for large parts of it? It wasn't until you read the comic book
Mhm.
that the nuances get explained. And you're like, oh yeah, and there on from that point of view. So for me, I think without if Star Wars was out now, you wouldn't need a Star Wars comic book because of all the different mass media things we got. Back then, you have to wait 3 years, man. You need
Yep.
something to whet your appetite.
I'll
For
say,
sure.
can I say one more comment with Roy Thomas on this?
Yeah,
Because
for
I
sure.
love Roy Thomas's work. You guys know that, especially on All Star Squadron for DC. But as a kid, when I was reading Star Wars books or anything, going back in time to read this,
Mm-hmm.
Roy Thomas had this thing of slowing my pace of reading down because I had no idea who the characters were. But there's so much text in here that I'm like, now I know what his name is. Now I know what he's supposed to do. Now I know
Exactly.
who he's friends with, who's evil, who's bad, what's the
Mm-hmm.
real goal of the Empire. So thanks to Roy Thomas, I started to understand that with when I reread this issue.
Yeah.
So
So there you go. It serves double points. Education keeps everyone. enthralled in the Star Wars universe whilst we were waiting for movies and stuff.
Yeah, the Force was with us, right?
Yeah, definitely. There you go. There's your 3 books for this week. Hope you enjoyed our tie-in special. Thankfully, we didn't have to read NFL Super Pro. Maybe we'll save that for another day. Maybe.
We'll do our sports tie-in books.
Yeah, can I just pick one of the? Can I pick X-Men #1 where the X-Men play basketball? Can I pick that one?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll go with that. Is that #1? It might be. All right. So don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows, including Professor.
No Prize Podcast, all about Marvel Comics, Disney Plus, and the MCU.
There you go. And of course, the 13th inspired and still ongoing TDC, the Definitive Crusade, for all your DC knowledge. There might even be some HBO Max stuff, but doubt it because I'm the host on that show and I don't get HBO Max because I'm, British. When DC Universe only applies on one country. Not that I've said that before.
Apparently, so is G.I. Joe. I guess now that I've learned that.
G.I. who? All right. And of course, you saw the advert for the Jank Think Tank. All right, excellent. So, gentlemen, thank you for hanging out. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure as always, Johnny.
I don't know if we're interested in playoff now that our teams are out, but if you are, go and enjoy the ball games.
I can still watch Tom Brady.
Titans for the win. I'm going with Tannehill this year, I think.
I think the Giants will do pretty well around the 13th hole.
Yeah.
In their golf tournament that they're having right now. So
is that what they're doing? They're playing golf.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Oh my God! All right. Okay. So, gentlemen, thanks very much. As always, I'm your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and adios.
See you.
Bye.